Thank you for joining today for another KeyServer training webinar. Today, we're going to focus primarily on Adobe, but please keep in mind that most of what we're going to talk about will apply to other software products as well, including now web-based products that are accessed through a browser. One of the new features in KeyServer's 7.5 release is that we can now track URL patterns that are defined by administrators and set up to be tracked. And the reporting on those looks just like any other product. Just a quick look at the outline. As I was doing some research into some of the Adobe licensing options, I ran across some Adobe history that, in the context of all of the changes that have been made in the last few years, in particular, I thought were some interesting facts about Adobe as a company I thought we'd talk about. We'll jump into the various licensing models, both for corporate, which is a lot simpler, business-based, and then for the educational or higher ed environment where there are more options and it can tend to be a bit more complex. And then we will look at policy configuration, and we'll talk about if you've already got some policies set up, how to gather what data those policies have been collecting, and then review those policies to make sure they're properly configured to give you all of the data that you really need, but then also ways to kind of set things up from scratch to make sure you're covering and keeping everything up to date. Then we'll move on to reporting. Based on the policy configurations that we've set up, we'll show you how you can run reports to effectively isolate various Adobe products and programs and figure out from there what licensing strategy or purchase decisions you should make. We'll briefly look at some potential pitfalls with regards to usage tracking and reporting, just so that you know you're not making any mistakes in setup and you make sure that things are set up properly, and when you pull data, you're looking at a complete picture and not just a partial picture. So really quickly, Adobe was founded in 1982, and the first product was PostScript, which is a page description language for printing and printers. Also in 1982, I thought it was interesting that Steve Jobs tried to buy Adobe for $5 million, and his offer was refused pretty much outright, and with some negotiation and pressure, the founder of Adobe was kind of pressured into making a deal with Jobs, and I think it was 19% of the company that he was allowed to buy. So he was able to purchase 19% of the shares of the company at what was at the time 5 times their current value. And that makes Adobe, or made Adobe, the very first Silicon Valley company that turned a profit in its first year in operations. Another interesting fact, Photoshop, which is probably the most well-known Adobe product overall, and KeyServer were both launched in the same year in 1989. Another thought, or another interesting point that I discovered, is the discrepancy between the prices of Adobe products between the US and other areas. I read that retail prices for many Adobe Creative products outside of the US can get as high as 2 times the price as the US. Something I read actually said that it was cheaper at one point to fly from Australia to the United States to purchase Adobe Creative Suite and then fly back than to just purchase it natively in the Australian market. And that kind of goes to some of the accusations that have been thrown at Adobe over the years for unfair practices, both in terms of pricing and unfair competitive practices, which ties into this discussion about licensing models and pricing that's so relevant and important today. The reason there's so much interest in making these decisions and tracking this data is because Adobe's a smart organization. They've been strategically purchasing companies that are competitive against them and pricing their models to gain as much foothold in the market and therefore as much profit as possible. And it's important for the users of their products to be aware of all of the options and keep track of the information that helps them make the best decision. The freehand settlement is a good example I wanted to discuss on that front. In 1994, Adobe acquired a company called Aldus Corp, which was a vendor for a product called Freehand, which was at the time the only competition to Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator on Macintosh computers. At the time in '94, the FTC stepped in and forced Adobe to sell freehand back to Aldus, and they banned Adobe from buying freehand again for 10 years. That ban lifted in 2005, and in between '94 and 2004, Altsys, another company that is actually the manufacturer and developer of freehand, was purchased by Macromedia. And in 2005, that's when Adobe bought Macromedia and managed to get a hold of freehand again. They were sued again by a group of 5,000 freehand users, but the suit was settled outside of trial, and Adobe has essentially shut down freehand ever since then. So these guys are very smart and doing a great job at making sure their products are well used and have the strongest foothold in the market. So let's move on to the next slide and look at Adobe licensing for businesses. This is much simpler, as I said, than the licensing decisions available for universities. And there's really only three options. You can purchase it as an individual, just as a lone photographer out there or graphic designer might do for their own freelance work. You can purchase for teams, still per user, but for teams, larger groups, per user licensing, or you can do an enterprise license, which they don't give a lot of details on their website about, and that option is also available to universities. So as we move on to educational licensing, I want to talk about the current options, of course, but going back and sort of looking at how the options have evolved, I think is helpful, in particular in the education market, in understanding where we are and where we are headed based on sort of the way things have gone in the past. Originally, Creative Suite was purchased per computer. And KeyServer, actually, we were deeply involved in the initial decision of Adobe that Adobe started selling concurrent use, and we were really the only product on the market that allowed for the management of concurrent use software at that time. As we stepped through CS 3, 4, 5, and 6, once we got to CS 6, concurrent use and perpetual licenses were still available. And when Creative Cloud was released, there was a time period where you could go with the subscription Creative Cloud model or continue to buy the Creative Suite the old way. But the options for Creative Cloud originally was 100% FTE or full-time employees. So it was essentially a site license to move on to subscription. After CS6 was removed, earlier than originally planned because of how quickly people were moving to subscription only, there was, of course, the per computer model. You could pay for the site license, and a lesser known model that was available to universities who called and complained, essentially. From what I understand, this was not advertised, but you had the ability to purchase a percentage of Creative Cloud licenses for whatever computers you wanted to install the full suite on, and then the other percentage would be Acrobat. So you could say 70% Creative Cloud, 30% Adobe Acrobat, and sort of pay less and distribute the products in that fashion. Very, very recently, they've added another option to the list for universities and the educational environment, and that is to kind of a combined approach, which is you pay per computer for labs and classrooms. As many users as they want can join and use the software, but they do have to have an account. They can just have a free unpaid Adobe account, and anybody with an account can log into computers that are paid per machine. And then in addition to paying per machine for those labs and classrooms, you would pay per user for staff. So you don't have to get a license for the site and every single staff member have products they don't need, but you can buy a Creative Cloud and Acrobat at the per user level for faculty and staff. If you discover through usage reporting that only 10% of your faculty is actually using Creative Cloud products other than Acrobat, then it might make more sense to go with that new option where you pay per user for staff instead of the 100% FTE model. I suspect that that's probably going to make the most sense for most institutions. As we move and start talking about policy configuration next here, I'll show you there are some settings that can help you make sure that your Acrobat usage can be tracked appropriately. And we'll talk about ways that you can break Acrobat usage out so that for those users who are only using Acrobat but have all of Creative Cloud installed, you can kind of get an idea of who those users are as well. There's actually a very easy report that can be run to make that happen. You may or may not already have policies in place to track Adobe, but either way, there is some usage recorded. You can see when it was first used and when it was last used, and we'll start there to have a look at what's currently going on, even without policies in place. Okay, so the first thing that we're typically going to do to get a general view of what's installed where, when it was last used, and when it was first discovered by the KeyServer, is to look at this audit products report, and that's audit products prod cross comp. And we could just jump in really quickly to this KeyServer instance. So the audit products report, the easiest way to run that up in the reports window here is just to go to the audit menu, and we'll run audit product cross computer, and that is this one here. You don't have to set up a date range or anything, because this is just going to pull data from the last audit, and I'm just going to click run. And what we will get is a audit report here. So these are all the products that have been discovered on the network. And if we open up one of these products, we can see all the computers that product has been installed on, and when it was first seen on those computers, and when it was last used as well. If it's blank, that means it has never been used, and that's very helpful information. If it's got a date there, that just means that was the last time that usage was seen. Without a policy in place, we can always get that much information at a minimum. If we open up one of these computer records, we can see specifically which programs that are a part of that product were used on each computer. So that's the audit products report. Another very useful one that can give us some helpful information is the unmanaged products report. That's also under the audit menu, and if we come down to the very bottom, we'll just quickly run that, and I'll show you what it looks like. And what this is it's going to only show you those products that have been installed but are not being used, and also the number of copies that have been discovered. So for example, on the computers in this demo network, this is Microsoft Office for Mac 2011 standard has been discovered on 276 computers, but there is no policy currently tracking that specific product, even though we do have at least one Office policy in place that's tracking usage for another Office product. I won't get too deep into the weeds of policy configuration here, but we are going to talk about making sure that everything is being tracked, and ultimately that particular report, unmanaged products, is the most important one when it comes to making sure that there's nothing installed out there on those computers that is not currently being tracked. Another important one is an upgrade discoveries report. So there's going to be some overlap between the one we just looked at and this report often, but once you've got your policies set up, upgrade discoveries is probably the best report that you can run, just to make sure you keep them up to date. If you spend some time and build out some policies today for your Adobe products, and you get all the way up to the Creative Cloud 2018, that's great. That's going to cover everything. But when Creative Cloud 2019 is installed, you're going to want to make sure that usage is being tracked, and this discovery report will tell you anything that is out there that whether or not you have it installed yet, definitions that have been added to our product recognition service that are upgrades to products that you do own and are tracking. So upgrade discoveries is useful for preempting installation of new products, just to make sure that when they are installed, your usage is going to continue to be tracked. Before we move on from here, I wanted to show current users a quick setting change that you may want to make, particularly around making sure that your product usage is being tracked properly. Specifically, you want to make sure computers that have the Acrobat product installed, so they don't have Creative Cloud, they only have Acrobat, you want to make sure that that gets tracked as a part of the Acrobat product and not inadvertently tracked as a part of Creative Cloud. And the way you do that is under this General Settings, Config, General Settings, Audits tab. And there's two checkboxes I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and turn on. And that is this Use Audit Product Database and Product Reports. And then the second one here as well, the Consult Audit Products Database when prioritizing policies. So one has to do with reports, which are after the fact, and the other has to do with policy prioritization, which is when a product launches. If a user out on the network somewhere opens up Photoshop and KeyServer notices that launch and needs to determine which policy to apply, well, it's going to consult what product is installed on that specific computer to determine the policy. So this is where that Acrobat Creative Cloud question comes in. So that was all on that front. When we get a little bit deeper into policy configuration, which we can go ahead and do now, the first thing you want to do is look to see whether you already have a policy for the product or products that we're talking about. In this case, there is an expired Creative Cloud 2016 policy, a Photoshop 2016 policy, and a Creative Cloud 2015 policy. So this looks like an out-of-date KeyServer to me. So if we open this up, we can dig a little bit deeper and see whether this is as out-of-date as it appears at first glance. So we'll pull up this policy details window and see what products are part of this policy. And indeed, we've got Creative Cloud 2013, 14, and 15 are the three products that are being tracked as a part of this policy. So this is an example where usage recorded in this KeyServer for Creative Cloud is going to be incomplete. And unless I come in here and have a look and see what products are being managed, I might look at usage and say, oh, that we're not using it at all because maybe everybody's using 2017 or 2018 by now. You can see this one policy has three products in it. You can configure your KeyServer policies many different ways. Probably the best thing to keep in mind when configuring these policies is to make it mirror your entitlement or what you actually purchased. In this case, Creative Cloud allows for backwards and forwards compatibility. As long as you have an active subscription, you can use any version of Creative Cloud. So what we might do is remove the year here and just call this Adobe Creative Cloud, and then add the rest of the Creative Cloud products to this one policy. Now, there's a lot more listed here because previously there were other options for Creative Cloud. If you know none of those are installed, you've run that unmanaged products report and they're not there, then there's no reason to add them necessarily, but it doesn't hurt anything to just add everything. In this case, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to select our 2016, 17, and 18, the ones that are standard Creative Cloud products that are missing, and drag those in. And with that change, we're going to make sure that we're tracking all Creative Cloud usage on the computers on this network. And I'll just save that by going to close the window here and click Save. This is not configured as a site policy. It's set up as a user-based policy with a specific set of users, and we have exceeded the limit with that change. So I'm going to go ahead and revert that. Don't save that. So we'll leave this for this data set at this time the way it currently is, but that's the steps you take. Most of the time when we are configuring these policies these days, because there's a lot less concurrent use, there's a lot less of this active specific license management going on at the KeyServer side. You can typically set these up as a site license and allow all users to launch and all usage to get tracked under an individual policy, whether it is user-based licensing or lab and computer-based licensing. Because with Creative Cloud, you've got to sign in using your Adobe account to actually launch and use the product. So you don't need to do that concurrent use type license management in that case within the KeyServer. And setting a policy up as a site license is sort of a shorthand, quick, easy way to gather all usage without having to worry too much about the details of a policy configuration. So that is a lot of the policy configuration information here. You really just want to make sure those products that are installed, usage is being tracked by a policy. Everything else comes down to running the appropriate reports to kind of parse out and identify what computers are using what products and what programs. So that's what we will talk about now as we move on to usage reporting. And there are four main pieces of information you're trying to gather when you are reporting on usage. One is no usage. What computers have products installed where those products are simply just not being used. Another option is just general usage. If you want to see what products are installed and how much they're being used across the computers on the network, what does the general usage look like? And we'll run a couple of reports there. Another thing we might want to see is what is low usage. You know, there's no usage, that's important, and that's very easily discoverable in an audit report. But what can we do to see those computers where maybe they've launched something a few times, but they've only used it for 10 minutes in the last year or the last quarter? You may not want to have it installed there. It's just too expensive. The amount of usage does not warrant the cost of the license. And what about usage beyond Acrobat? If a computer has Creative Cloud installed, but they've only ever launched Acrobat, then there's an example of a situation where you can save a significant amount of money by just installing Acrobat instead of paying for a license, whether that be for a user or even a classroom environment. If you're in a classroom that only ever launches Acrobat, then why pay for a full suite installation? Product optimization is another one that will get us there as well. So let's move on to a couple of these policies that can be useful. Again, we looked at that audit products report. I'm just going to run it again very quickly. Audit products, computer, cross product, to again point out how we can see those computers that have no usage in this report. So, and you can sort by when something was last used. So if we reverse this view here and open up a product and sort by last used, I can see those computers that have no usage at all for these components. The next thing we want to look at is general usage. So what a usage report looks like, if we come down, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just grab our Creative Cloud products, knowing that not everything is being tracked. We'll look at usage product by computer. So this will give me a list of products, primary, and then under each product, it will show me specific individual computers and how much usage they have. Division or computer groups. So if you have classroom, say Adam's lab has 73 computers in it, in this case, looking here, we can run it across that whole division, and it's going to aggregate computer usage into that one classroom. So I can see how much usage exists in each of these classrooms overall. And that is under the product by division. A user pool, we won't get into details there. That has to do with more active license management than what we're discussing today. Product by user. So if you're paying for user licenses, this would be a great one to run, for example, in an educational environment for your faculty and staff, if you're buying it per user, or you want to see what it would look like to buy per user. How many licenses would you need to buy? Maybe you're paying for a site license now, but you just want to see what that option would look like in terms of pricing for your faculty and staff. I'll highlight those computers, select those computers in your computers window, make those the target of your report. Let's go ahead and step through this. We've selected these products, and these are the products we're going to run this in. And let's see if we can find a division. Here's a faculty and staff division for just as an example really quickly here. You can add that to the list. So these products across this list of computers, let's say for this quarter. And we'll run this, get an idea what usage looks like for just our faculty and staff computers over the course of just this quarter. So this is a user-based report. We've got our list of users under this specific product. So Adobe Creative Cloud 2015. These are the users that have used it. This is the total amount of time each user has used these products. This is in hours. You can tell this is simulated data. The total number of total count is the total number of launches. So we've launched this product or components of this product 5,800 times by this user. And this is something that I learned recently and tends to be a question that comes up pretty regularly. So if you've ever wondered why the average here may seem off in many cases, it's not a simple division of the time by the total count. What this is average time over the course of a week for the time period selected. So we're looking at the last quarter. This is the average amount of time per week this user uses this product. And then the average count is the same, the average number of launches in a week over this time period. If you wanted an average, that is the total amount of time divided by the total count, that is here. And if we right click up in these column headers, we can add that average per use. And now we've got average per use for this user is 3 hours and 19 minutes. This is what our Adobe Creative Cloud usage looks like for Creative Cloud 2015 per user. And this tells us exactly what users we need to give a license to based on the amount of time they spend. And all of these users are spending a significant amount of time per quarter. I would imagine if you were to run this report locally, because this is simulated data, you're going to get more reasonable, logical numbers, and maybe a lot of users that have very, very little usage, which is a good piece of information when trying to make these decisions. That's a general usage type report. What we ran here is a product-based report. So this user, maybe the reason these numbers are so high is because they launch every single Creative Cloud component, and each one is tracked individually under this product-based report. So the next thing we want to look at is low usage beyond Acrobat. And what that means is how can we identify those groups that are getting usage of Adobe Creative Cloud, but what users are using only Acrobat, and how much usage are we getting above and beyond Acrobat? The way we want to do that is we're going to go through a few steps here so that we can break out Acrobat usage from Creative Cloud usage and get an idea of what the two look like, so that you know computers that are only using Acrobat even when they have Creative Cloud installed. So bear with me here as we step through a couple of steps here. We're going to first go into I think it's the Programs window. So what we need is an application filter. So when we go into this Programs window, so under Window, Programs, the first step of this process is to create a filter for applications. And I won't go into too many details as to why at the moment, but if you go in and create a new filter and drag in application, status is application, and we're going to apply that. And what this really does is it just excludes utilities and unnecessary components, and we'll use this as a part of the report just to filter down to only those components that are primary Creative Cloud components. The status is application and therefore not utility or ignored. So that sort of limits the components that will be a part of this report that we run. The next step is under reports. We're going to look at config program by product. So this configuration policy, and we'll pull this up. And what we're going to do is going to target our Creative Cloud products by just selecting and dragging those in. We're going to target these as the primary target, and then we're also going to take that application status filter so that we're only looking at components of these products that are primary components. So I'm going to pull up that programs window one more time just so that I can grab that filter that we set up, application status, and drag that in. And again, just to look at the inside of that filter, now the one that's actually set up properly, just select status and click is application, and then that filter will be used, and we should see it down at the bottom here, application status. This is a configuration policy, so there's no settings for date ranges, and so we'll just run that. And this is that report. So what this is showing us is programs that have been discovered, and then the products that they are a part of. And we're going to collapse that down. So we've got the list of programs, and what we want to do is select everything that is not Acrobat. So now we're looking at Creative Cloud products and the components that are not Acrobat, because that's what we really want to get usage for, is those products or those components of Creative Cloud that are not Acrobat. So we've got everything except Acrobat selected here, and we're going to run a usage report, program by computer in this case. So if I right click and select usage and look at usage for these specific programs, we're isolating, again, just those programs that are part of Creative Cloud, but not including Acrobat. And if we run that again for this quarter, we will see what we get here. So this is aggregated data. So we're seeing computers and how much usage they have for Creative Cloud as a whole minus Acrobat. So these are the ones that you want to make sure that you have a complete Creative Cloud installation installed on, as long as they have relevant usage. So these can be excluded, and any other computers that currently have Acrobat installed or Creative Cloud installed that are not part of this report just means they have no usage. So this allows us to identify those computers with enough usage to warrant the purchase that does not include Acrobat. And then the reverse of that, of course, is to run an Acrobat usage report. So go back to this report, and we can look at just those Acrobat programs and run a usage report on those. Now, that's not gonna exclude the other Creative Cloud components, but you can get a view of how much Acrobat usage you have overall, separate from Creative Cloud that way. So again, the idea there is to identify those computers that have a lot of Creative Cloud usage that is not Acrobat specific, and more importantly, those computers that have low usage for Creative Cloud that is not Acrobat. Now, what about just outright identifying those computers that aren't using anything except for Acrobat? There's actually a report called Product Optimizations that is for specifically that purpose. And if we go under report, product optimizations. So this one is under audit as well, and we will look at product by computer. There's no date range set. I think this looks back at 3 months by default. And what we're going to see here, the purpose behind this report is to identify where you can save money by buying a less expensive product that would cover all of your usage. And what I mean by that is, if we open up this Creative Cloud 2015 product, we see a list of computers where there is a version of this product that is less expensive. I'm going to change the view to something a little bit better, which is the second option. And now if we open this up, what we will see is a list of programs with computers that have only used that program. So let's just open up this one here as an example. So with this product optimizations report, we can see that there are computers, this list of computers that have Creative Cloud installed, Creative Cloud 2016, but the only product that has any usage is Acrobat DC Pro. Now, the limitation to this report is that if there are computers that accidentally launched Photoshop one time in this time period, those computers are going to be excluded. And that's where the prior stepped process that we just took is going to allow us to identify low usage. But this is a very quick way to jump in, run a single report in no time that will identify things that computers that have no usage and less expensive versions of products that could be installed. So what we talked about on this front, just to pull the slide back up, is we looked at those instances where there's no usage. Typically just that general audit report will work. Audit product cross computer will show you the last use date, and if that last use column is blank, those computers have zero usage for those products. If you want to kind of dig in deeper and analyze general usage, you want to turn on those settings that I mentioned and run just a general usage report, usage by division, product by division, or policy by division, or by computer, or by user, depending on what is relevant. Make sure you select an appropriate time range when you do that. From that point, though, where you've got a list of computers with no usage, even though it's installed, you got a couple of reports that give you general usage information and a list of computers that have it installed with low usage. And then you've had a look at that product optimization report where you can see less expensive versions of products that could be installed on certain computers. That's a lot of information that you can then use to analyze what your cost would be given the various options available to you from Adobe.